So Jen, we know you just came back from China.
I did. I just got back.
Do you want to share something about yourself and also about your first trip to China?
Sure. My name is Jane McPherson, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Georgia at the School of Social Work. And my specialty is human rights and human rights practice in the field of social work. And I had the pleasure a few years ago of meeting folks from the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and they invited me to come to China to do some training for social workers there.
So did you find the trip exciting? What impressed you? Anything you want to share?
Oh, I mean, there's so much that I want to share. It was really a remarkable experience. Raoul Wallenberg Institute is RWI. They collaborate with an agency called Qiaoye, which specializes in adolescents, especially adolescents in conflict with the law. And they are working to provide the very best services they can to the young people who come into their care. And so I had this great opportunity to come and do a training for Qiaoye under the auspices of RWI, but also some of the kind of the larger social work community with which Qiaoye also operates. What did I love? Well, I went there to present my kind of model on what human rights practice can look like in social work. And I presented it very much like I do when I teach in the United States, beginning initially by asking, what are human rights? So the first afternoon that I began the training, I was immediately impressed by these 25 social workers and how much they knew and how quickly they were willing to sort of step into a conversation about human rights with me as a foreigner. And all of our conversations were mediated by translation because I am outside both the culture and language in China. So it was extremely interesting. We went around the room and the social workers introduced themselves to me. I asked them to mention a human right that they were aware of. And they went through many, both the political, economic, social, cultural rights. They really easily brought them to mind. It was very interesting to me.
So about the training, can you share some of the method or model you use during your training?
Sure. So I've developed a model of human rights practice and social work, which is very much evolved from UN models of human rights-based approaches and also used in international development. So my personal definition is that human rights practice and social work sees through human rights lens, uses human rights methods, and aims for human rights goals. And the methods I use or at least that I've identified and really train on, are methods that social workers are familiar with.
So when you were interacting with the social workers in China, is there anything surprising?
I mean, there were many things surprising. I guess one thing,
in good or bad ways?
well, happily, the surprises were really good on this trip. My model, using these methods, it's a strengths-based model that I developed really around social workers in the United States. So one of the interesting things was to see how relevant this group of social workers seemed to find it in China. They were excited to look at the 8 methods that I've identified, which include participation, strengths-based practice, using micro and macro together, capacity building, non-discriminatory practice. They were really interested in looking for examples of those in their work. One of the things that they really looked at a lot was non-discrimination. I think I had spoken to you about that previously here at the Carter Center, and that's clearly a big issue among juvenile justice social workers in Beijing, is that many of the young people who become in conflict with the law are not from Beijing. They're from outside of the city. And because of the hukou system in China, those young people don't have access to education or healthcare or job, as I understand it, when they come to the city. And so they were really interested in kind of thinking about that as gee, is that an issue of citizenship? Is it an issue of nationality? Is it an issue of human rights? How do we address the fact that these migrants have different access to human rights than than similar young people in China? So that was very interesting. And one of the things they realized is that in their advocacy work that they were already making inroads in that way, that they had brought certain differential sentencing practices to the judges to let them know that perhaps these migrant young people were being treated differently than Beijing nationals, and working for Beijing nationals or working for the migrants to be treated similarly under the law and in the courts in Beijing. And that was, it was fun to watch these social workers realize, oh yeah, okay, we're doing this. This is human rights practice as you're defining it, as we're looking at it now, and we can see that this is something that we're already engaged in. So that was really great. And it was interesting to see how I think eager that at least this group of 25, they really took my model and they took it apart, and they were quick to look and see how are we using these practices in our work. I think one difference in my model, that's an important difference that we used in China versus the United States. In the United States, I use activism, and in China, we did translate that as advocacy to make it just easier to kind of take in and understand.
So that's very exciting. Do you have any feedback from the participants? Do you remember some of the very impressive ones?
Yeah, I mean, one of the final morning, because they took such an interest in the methods, the final morning we really did take on the whole model, and I asked the social workers to use human rights as an assessment tool. And one of the things that most impressed me was watching them take, say, Article 13 and 14 and look at migrant rights, take Article 29 and think about duties and responsibilities. The group that did that particularly said at the end of training that they would be planning to integrate that model into the work they were doing. For many, we sat after the training and in this group of 25, and each of us spoke about our responses to training, and I did take some notes. Many of the students or social workers mentioned that it was the first time that they'd really been introduced to human rights to the extent that they had in this training, and so they were interested by that. They were really interested to think. One student said, "Oh, I thought human rights were this noble idea, but I had no idea that it had anything to do with my life or my professional work." So I really saw the shift that I'm hoping to achieve with the work that I do, to see these social workers take on the idea like, oh yeah, I'm working in the field of human rights, that's what I do. So that was very exciting. Several people said yes, that it was also very helpful for them to think, oh, okay, I'm not just helping this individual. If I expand from a micro perspective to include the macro, perhaps I can shift the environment in which people live. Perhaps I can help create better access to human rights, not just for this person, but for their communities and families, and for similar students and young people like them. I think those were the things that were most impressive to me.
What do you think each one of us can really help?
Well, I think, I think that it's easy, and sometimes we make an error of just memorizing a list. Oh, here are human rights. But I think that's a very minimizing way of understanding human rights. Human rights are a practice. And so I think I'm teaching human rights in social work because that's what I happen to do. But human rights practice can happen as you and I converse and we treat each other with respect. Human rights can happen as we build capacity in each other. So I think certainly in any kind of government services, public services, healthcare services, educational services, all of our services, public services, can be human rights practices. That's
Very
my hope.
good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.